Okay, what's up, everybody? It's Mitch here with Century 21 and the Cleary team in Peterborough. This is another episode of the PTBO Housing Show that we are doing weekly. This week we have an interview with Stephen Wright, who is running for Mayor of Peterborough. Stephen has been involved in local politics for a number of years now. He is a wealth of information when it comes to municipal politics. We talk about what got him involved and so interested in this job, how long he's been in Peterborough, what he thinks his top priorities will be if he gets the mayor position, and all types of things to do with housing, including Bill 109, how Peterborough can expand its borders, where we build next, and all kinds of great things. It was a lot of lessons for me on municipal politics, and I think you guys are going to really enjoy it. If you appreciate Stephen's views on things and you want to support him in his race, you can go down below and find the link for his website where you can formally make a donation. I hope everybody enjoys the interview, and we'll look forward to talking with everybody next week. Okay, hello everybody, and hello Stephen. So we're here with Stephen Wright, who is our current North Ward councillor and current mayoral candidate, one of two mayoral candidates, and the first to officially announce.
That's correct.
And we have all kinds of good stuff we want to go over today, but I want to start just by talking about what got you into politics and what led you up to wanting to bite off something so big as taking on the mayor position.
Well, I got involved first in politics when I was probably 14 years old when we were out in Alberta. Mm-hmm. I had the opportunity to work on a Ralph Klein campaign when he was actually running for mayor of Calgary.
Interesting.
One of those kids that was eager enough to deliver flyers to the doors. And though the interest grew in my first year at University of Winnipeg when I actually ran for school board trustee. School boards were selling buildings, and we're wondering, the question was, well, these were paid for by taxpayer. Why don't they go to community organizations that can't afford that kind of capital project? And, years later when I moved to Peterborough, it was about the property tax question. My taxes were going up, and I didn't see much as far as changes in service levels. So I got involved, and I ran in 2014. I wasn't successful. 2018, I ran again, defeating an incumbent. And of course, now 4 years later, some of the stuff I've seen on council, it says, well, we need real strong, decisive leadership on a lot of files. So now I'm running for mayor. Interesting.
And so when you beat the incumbent, what were the primary, how did that play out?
Well, that election, actually, we did have a significant wedge issue on the sale of PDI. I was staunchly opposed to it. And looking at it from a business perspective, you've got a $3.5 billion infrastructure deficit for the city of Peterborough. And when you look at investment for businesses in that community, when you hold a deficit that large, there's not much interest for private sector corporations to want to locate in your community, because the thinking generally is, we'll have to pick up the cost by way of increased commercial taxes to pay down that deficit. And, looking at our transportation master plan and the road network projects that have to be done, you have almost $1 billion of infrastructure improvements that have to be done on our road. So in opposition to selling our local utility, because the city owned it, we get dividends from Kofi. So every single one of the road project that needs to be done has poles and wires that are going to have to be relocated. So here we've gone from being able to control some of the costs around road improvement to having no control over the relocating of our utilities on infrastructure projects. So I was opposed to that, and the incumbent I defeated actually supported the sale of the utility.
Right. So you were on board with keeping Peterborough utilities intact.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Interesting.
And you look years later, you've got $55 million sitting in a bank account based on the time that the deposit was made and investment was made. And then you look at your current markets today and how the markets are performing. Would that money have been better utilized if we were able to provide rebates to the residents to bring their costs down? Nobody predicted COVID and the impact of COVID on individual residents or even on our commercial operators.
Wow. So you were pretty involved in this stuff early on. Clearly you had an interest in politics. Like you said, if you're going back to when you were 15, because not the average Joe in the North End was tracking that issue that tightly.
No.
Give me, because I'm interested now. We started talking about this quickly before we started rolling. I know Steve very briefly, so you're learning on the spot as I am here. We're discovering, sort of going through the biography here, because was your father involved in politics at all, or did he get you interested in it?
No, Dad was a brilliant thinker, and he loved to read. I've always thought my father should have been a lawyer. But he worked in the building trades as a contractor with his specialty in marble and ceramic tiles. He tried to get us in the trades, but no.
And was your mother in any way?
No, she worked as a domestic. So when our family first came to Canada, Mom worked as a domestic worker. And did start her own business later on, a few years after coming to Canada as a cleaning service.
So the political interest was purely just from watching and just wanting to get involved.
They questioned whether or not I was their child. They said, what the hell's wrong with this guy? He's interested in what? No. You find, Mitch, that most people from third worlds or culturalized communities don't really have an interest in politics at all. Especially coming from communities or parts of the world where being outspoken on issues could, cost you significantly. And not just in a financial sense.
For sure, because you're, correct me if I'm wrong, you're before Peterborough. How long have you been a resident of Peterborough, and where were you prior to?
So I've been in Peterborough for almost 20 years. Same address too. And prior to that, I was actually working for a political organization in Winnipeg. So when our family immigrated to Canada, we started off in New Brunswick, Toronto, and at a time where the economy in Ontario was really suffering, but starting to boom in Alberta with the oil industry. So then our family went out west. And after high school, I moved back to Ontario.
Interesting.
So we've seen Canada.
So you've seen Canada from no, that's good. It gives you a lot of perspectives, because I noticed I've lived in Alberta for a good period of time too, and you notice how different the politics is locally there in terms of municipal approvals. Big difference too.
Big major differences.
So the councils and everything, it is just totally different mindset to development. So that's a good segue to chat about. Before we launch totally into real estate and housing, you're running for, you're shooting for the mayoral position. What do you see as could you outline the top 3 issues that you would tackle, prioritize right away?
Well, my campaign is launched, and there is a slogan for it, a clear vision for Peterborough moving forward. And our clear vision talks about climate change, community safety, leading and engaging in our development process, economic development, our airport, and reinventing our downtown. So, each of the letters is for each of our main campaign positions. So we have a clear vision moving Peterborough forward.
So those are, how many points is that? You got climate change, you've got downtown, the airport, and was there
five major points? So climate change and community under the sea. Leading in our development, addressing our housing issue in the city. Our economic development, because Peterborough has always hold one of the reputation as the highest unemployment numbers across the country. So with a college and a university in the city, it's important that we start addressing that, given our aging population. So we want to keep our young people in Peterborough so they can make their contribution on paying for the services the city has to deliver. And our airport, we have, and I say this, one of the most viable and economic development tool, and that's our airport. So, 3 years on council, 3 years pushing aggressively on that issue, we now have an airport strategic advisory board that's looking at how do we grow the airport business model and eventually get the city to passenger service, given we're the largest geographical zone in the country with no passenger service to it.
Really? Interesting.
And the catchment area, interesting enough, our catchment area for air service from Peterborough extends all the way to, I would say, as far as Kingston.
Yeah.
And on the west side, as far as Pickering, Ajax.
Yeah.
So, which is significantly larger in number than the province of New Brunswick, with 4 municipal airports.
Wow.
And all an hour apart from each other.
That's wow. So why is it so underutilized, do you think, up to this point?
You know, I don't want to blame previous councils for their short-sightedness on it, but I don't really think they looked at it from what the regional economic value could have been from that airport to try and get us to establish service. You know, we have our fixed operators at the airport, such as Flying Color, and they do employ a great number of people. But your fixed operators don't generate tax revenue for the city, whereas if you had landing fees, airport improvement fees, car rental counters that were paying taxes, your revenues from your restaurants. So there are a lot of other hooks attached to an airport that the city can generate new revenue from. And, you know, I put it to one councillor that our airport, within the first few years of established service, should be able to generate almost the same amount of money for the city as we are generating from all our lines of taxation right now, whether it be commercial, residential, or industrial class taxes.
Wow. So, okay, and that leads me to another question, because that's a substantial amount. It begs the question for me: what our revenue at a glance for the layperson, most simplistic breakdown for the average person to think of, hey, we have this much to spend, here's where it comes from, because the municipal governments unfortunately cannot print money like the federal governments can. So
we lock sovereignty, so we can't do that.
Yeah, as much as that'd be, you know, it would be interesting to say the least. But if people were to wrap their head around where the budget money comes from in the city of Peterborough, how would you break that down?
So your main categories of income for municipal government are going to come from property taxes, commercial property taxes, and your industrial class taxes. In the city of Peterborough, to remain competitive and to the benefit or the credit of the last council, they looked at making sure there's some kind of rebasing of the commercial and the industrial class taxes so that we can be competitive with other municipalities.
Rebasing an adjustment of the rate, or
shifting it from commercial, industrial, and putting it on the residential taxes, because we can't afford to give away money. So the taxes has to be collected from one category or the other. So you've seen a larger shift
moving on to property
onto
taxes.
the property taxes.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So I do. So, like you said, the airport, so much potential for people who are residents of the city without having to pay higher property taxes, receive the benefits of a higher budget the municipality has to spend without directly paying the cost, so to speak.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And you know, like any business operation, you try to look at, well, how can I cut my cost? And, you know, the process of municipal government is to provide a service. So you can't realistically look at cutting that service once you've established it, whether it's poverty support, housing support, or the money that's spent on your infrastructures like your road and your water and sewage. So then you've got to look at your city-owned operation and says, well, how can we generate more revenue? So you can either do it by increasing taxes, which you do have an effective rate increase every year from the assessed value. So you see a small increase there. And through the budget process, there's usually an increase to ensure that we have enough money for capital projects as well as our operating cost. But you can look at your revenue operating businesses and says, you know, listen, we can actually find ways to launch new markets from, for example, the airport. You know, you can just look at your fixed operators and say, well, they pay some property taxes. Or you can look at it and says, well, we can also generate new money as a result of landing fees, being able to fly into Peterborough. There's also the tourist spend and the disposable income portion of that tourist dollar.
Totally. Yeah, there'd be a lot of outflow. People come the day before, or go get lunch right after they land, before they drive home, and fueling up here and whatnot. So, interesting. Okay, so on the topic of employment lands, because it out to that area as well towards the airport, and this will lead us into the discussion about 109 eventually. But in terms of Peterborough's employment lands, and there's been a lot of discussion in the last year about increasing our approved employment lands and being able to attract some big industrial players. What do you think is the most relevant topics of discussion when it comes to that? Because if we could backtrack to one point that, you know, I'll leave it to you to inform the listeners on that vote that happened up in the Airport Road section to annex some land off of Cavan?
Cavan. So several things happened there, actually. There were a few councillors in discussion, and a number of previous councils have tried to forge an annexation deal, and all have failed. It got close with this current council with some negotiating that was being done on an area of land with several landowners on Highway 28. And it's, you know, amazingly enough, I've always thought that was an area to be developed for a sports campus.
Right.
Because sports tourism, a $6.8 billion industry with 40% of that money staying in Ontario, would be significant draw for our tourism sector in Peterborough. So I supported the development of the area. City staff, on their own volition, decided to send the minister a letter with the city's position in opposition to that MZO.
MZO, what's to break that down for people?
So that's a municipal zoning order. So typically the way zoning would work, it would come to your local council, and then council would approve a zoning for some type of development, whether it be commercial, residential, or industrial. So that's in the purview of the city council. But in this particular case, this development and the objections that were thrown at it, the property owners all collectively said, let's go straight to the Minister of Municipal Affairs and get an order, a zoning order from the minister. So the Township Council unanimously voted in favor of getting that MZO. The city and staff at the city decided that they wanted to oppose or object the MZO. So my vote that night on council was against the city taking the position.
Right. Again, so you were pro.
I was pro
for
the MZO.
And why was the council against it?
No, the council felt that natural heritage features, there was no discussion.
Because we're talking about specifically the piece of property or area is right at the southwest corner, basically, of Airport Road and the bypass road out up
By the 115?
By the
Yeah.
115.
Yeah.
Natural heritage features.
Yes.
I mean, it strikes me as humorous almost that area could even be brought up for discussion.
And you know, so in listening to councillors' concerns around this issue, wetlands, natural heritage features, a buffer, and a development that's so close to built boundaries for the city of Peterborough. But what they missed was that this MZO and the request for it was not in the city of Peterborough, and I felt strongly that there was none of our business.
Right.
You know, we would look at it differently if we were looking at the development, say, in the Heritage Park subdivision, and somebody from a neighboring township, say Selwyn, said, well, listen, that development is too close to something that we want to do, therefore the city shouldn't do it.
Yeah.
I mean, that's an impact.
But this wasn't our land. It wasn't our, and they're saying, I follow you totally. Okay. And so heritage features, it really seems to me that it makes sense now. I understand your position. So I would say I tend to agree with your position on that.
Well, not only that, but you had a developer that, you know, in developing their properties there would actually be of benefit to our airport.
Yeah.
Now, the airport's not in the city of Peterborough. It's adjacent to this development that would happen. So getting municipal services to that airport would be a benefit to the city of Peterborough, and that would only happen with this development, this area.
So this municipal zoning order that basically the Cavan South Monaghan is it
Cavan South Monaghan.
So Cavan goes to just take it all the way up to Ontario, to the provincial level, to try and get the zoning change. Peterborough comes in, essentially blocks them. And in terms of the annexation negotiations in the past, how do these types of deals fall apart in your opinion? Like, how do these, like, why can't everybody, you know, like,
I might want to say things that would get me into trouble, but I think poor negotiation.
We won't let you do that. Yeah.
But when you're negotiating, you always have to remember in these municipal land deals who you're negotiating for.
Mm-hmm.
And at the end of the day, a job in Cavan Monaghan is of economic value to Peterborough.
Mm-hmm.
A house purchased in Cavan Monaghan is supportive of our downtown businesses in Peterborough.
Mm-hmm.
So the collaboration that has to happen, in my view, in my opinion, didn't happen with taxpayers in mind.
Mm-hmm.
Because deals have fallen through because of development timelines, development charges being collected on development, and how they were orchestrating payments to Cavan Monaghan.
Mm-hmm.
But what was surprising of the current negotiation was that there was no monies being requested from the city. You had the landowners that are part of the MZO that said, listen, we will bring those lands into the city boundary.
Mm-hmm.
And it still met with opposition.
Yeah. And so, because of course, it boils down to, in a lot of cases, money in some direct or indirect way. But there's so many interest groups too, like you said, the heritage features they're trying to protect. How does one decide when those topics, those discussions start? Kevin said, we're going to bring it into your boundary. How does that, whose taxes, how do you divvy up? Who pays for what? Stretching the services, tying into the wastewater management, and then who reaps the benefit of the industrial activity, the taxation on that. How do those conversations?
And those were some of the conversations that saw deals fall apart.
Mm-hmm.
Saying, if we did do this, if we did cross-border servicing, for example,
mm-hmm.
What would the city get back in return
mm-hmm.
as far as tax revenue to offset the cost?
Mm-hmm.
How much would Cavan pay and how much would the city receive,
mm-hmm.
and over what timeline would they pay for it?
Mm-hmm.
To me, those are all moot points.
Yeah.
Because you have to look at your tax base eventually and says, well, to what benefit are we growing the region?
Mm-hmm.
Because it now has to
I know everyone's thinking too individually, not regionally, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And, when we just completed our official plan to 2051, well, by 2051, if we're still looking at Peterborough's 58 square kilometers, then...
Mm-hmm.
Boy, I missed the mode on projections.
Yeah.
In the worst possible way. And I don't get my projections wrong.
Yeah, yeah. No, that's interesting. So I think about that. That's a good launch into the discussion about, we talked about it before we started shooting, how really Peterborough, right now as we shoot this, we're towards Keene, we're in autonomy, South Monaghan, and you think Cavan, you think Ennismore, Selwyn Township. They should all be acting as one, right? They should all be as one body. Mm-hmm. How does the transition to that look, or how do we get to that, or how soon does that happen?
Well, we can look at amalgamations.
Mm-hmm.
As I said on a previous show discussing this, that the time frame for annexation of land from Cavan Monaghan is long gone.
Mm-hmm.
Peterborough is 58 square kilometers. So the majority of what you have for development in the city of Peterborough generates any new tax revenues, predominantly infill.
Mm-hmm.
So when you, just to cover, for example, your basic infrastructure cost and the maintenance, and then trying to tackle the infrastructure deficit, you're building anywhere from 300 to 800 homes
mm-hmm.
every year.
Mm-hmm.
There is nowhere in Peterborough that you can say in the next 10 to 20 years you're building 300 to 800 single-family townhouses or condominiums that are be subrogated to municipal taxes
mm-hmm.
every year.
Every year, yeah.
So at some point, you're going to have to start looking at the lands within Cavan Monaghan, Selwyn, and say, well, this now has to be the city of Peterborough.
Yeah, almost immediately. We've got Park Hill West, right? There's still some stuff on the horizon, but realistically, we talk about it all the time because you're in the north side. Mm-hmm. You're on the boundary there. Yeah. Correct me if I'm wrong. You're basically maxed out, and then the north end's totally...
Yeah, we're completely at the city's boundary. The Heritage Park subdivision, for example,
mm-hmm.
has a development lock on it because of it's attached to the parkway. So mm-hmm. you've got a subdivision where you need a secondary exit to complete it.
Mm-hmm.
And we're talking 20 years later
mm-hmm.
that subdivision is not complete. Anywhere else I've been across the province where there is a development in process, 3 to 5 years and developers done and they've moved out and they've had the development over the city. We're 20 years on one.
Oh, yeah.
You know, and you're so right when you say we're built right to the city borders, because the project at Nassau Mills, that is the limit for the city, right across the street from Trent University.
Yep.
That is the city limit.
Yep.
So anything further, which there is land for development and good land for development, is now in Selwyn.
Yep.
So, you know, if you even look at staged amalgamation, compare, say, the city of Kawartha Lakes and how that amalgamation happened, Hamilton and how that amalgamation happened, and even the city of Ottawa. Mm-hmm. So what we have to do now is start collectively streamlining our services and say, well, let's be more cooperative.
So question on that. Who, when you amalgamate, I think of company mergers, I think normally there's some duplication of roles. Who stands to lose in that? Do people lose their jobs, or how does that all play? Is that some of the main resistance to those types of things, or control?
You'd see some streamlining of the administrative services. Mm-hmm. For example, you wouldn't have 8 CAOs, 8 city solicitors, or 3 city solicitors. You start to amalgamate departments based on your population base. Mm-hmm. You know, you'd also see some streamlining of the councils themselves, because the city of Peterborough has 10 councillors.
Yeah.
And, you know, I've always thought it odd that you have 10 councillors representing a population of only 88,000 people versus a city of Toronto where you'll have one councillor that represents a population of 140,000 people. Mm-hmm. So you have that overrepresentation aspect as well, and it would see some reduction of numbers of members of councils in the neighboring townships.
And that's healthy in your opinion?
It's extremely healthy. You get a streamlined process to getting things done. And quite frankly, councils will start thinking more corporately about getting things done.
Interesting. So that is a good segue into 109, because we're talking about getting things done, talking about building homes and making decisions. And so you introduced me to 109 actually at the Home Builders Design Awards Gala, and I was not familiar to it previous to that, but it sounds like it's a topic that's got a lot of, like we said, it's got a lot of meat on that bone. So let's dig into that 109, because you're all for it, right? Or there's some exciting things.
Yeah, there's some exciting things about it. What 109 presents as the More Homes Act, as it's called, it's going to present some challenges for some municipal councils that like to really chokehold development.
Is it a provincial bill?
It's a provincial legislation that tries to get to some of the solutions that a lot of developers have had with dealing with councils on site plan approval, building permit processes, and quite frankly, what the development community said are some unreasonable delays. So 109 actually establishes timeline processes with some punitive measures for municipal councils for delaying an actual development application.
So now, okay, so maybe I'm mistaken, because this was Ford that brought. So 109, I was confused. I know of the penalties, but more specifically, I think you were talking about maybe taking away some powers in a sense. Like what powers would any of the councils lose in their ability to block developments?
Well, for example, you've got Schedule 11. Schedule 11 would take away, which is a heritage designation on any kind of property. So instead of taking that to the conservation or to a tribunal that would deal specifically with that heritage property, to kind of
a heritage-based council, one that was meant just for that type of ordeal. Yeah.
So now that would go to LPAT, the Land Planning Tribunal, for a decision. So decisions at LPAT are final. You don't adjudicate those decisions. So whereas if it went to a tribunal like the heritage designation, you would be able to appeal.
Could still be
refused.
Yeah,
whatever they came down to. And
so they could block it, and then you'd be back going around in circles. Yeah.
So, and you could be at it for quite a while. You could make all your court applications, and could be at it for a while. But now that changes, and I mean that is problematic for some communities across Ontario, where they have a lot of heritage zones. Peterborough does have a heritage downtown, and there are those that would make the argument that it's important to protect that heritage zone. For the development community, though, they would look at that and says, well, there's a challenge in protecting heritage zone, because if you have a building and you need to take it down to do the right type of infill, a heritage designation on that property in a heritage district makes it that much more challenging.
I agree, and that's a point that I feel very much that it's so counterproductive to what people want to achieve. Is what's the value to the community overall of some of these old facades and whatnot versus what a 6-7 story building, modern, updated, and the traffic it could bring to the businesses. And to me, it doesn't even really compare. But
and you have a very few developers that really can manage retrofitting a heritage property. And I mean, in Peterborough, if anybody's ever looked at the Y-Loft,
beautiful.
It is a beautiful project. It's amazing, and it adds real value to downtown.
Yep.
But then if you ask your question of how many developers out there would make that kind of investment on a development, because that would be significant in maintaining the heritage feature plus the modern additions to a building like that, and then taking all into account all the new development around environmental concerns. So it makes it very expensive, and it doesn't bring you any closer to affordable housing.
No,
because of the cost.
For sure. I know. I laugh sometimes. It's kind of like it's a little bit oversimplistic when they talk about preserving heritage and what it's so intangible what they're trying to preserve. And so, for example, some conversations have come up around the Pig's Ear, the old Pig's Ear building, and preserving it as heritage. And it's decisions like trying to preserve something like that. Of course, there's many good memories there, and of course, but in terms of trying to preserve that versus it's like what's become heritage is looking back at photos from 5 years ago and saying, hey, there was a last $350,000 house for sale in Peterborough. That's heritage. That used to be 3 years ago something you could afford to buy.
There definitely needs to be a better definition in defining what heritage is and what value that heritage property actually brings. I mean, you brought in a good example of the Pig's Ear. I mean, I walked by it with a potential investor on Saturday, and we were looking at this building, and it says, the design structure is like, if you were to take half that building down, could you keep that design and add it to a new build? And you absolutely can.
Yeah. I know what you mean to preserve that. And I mean, in my own personal opinion, is there's museums, there's a place for archiving history. It doesn't have to be taking up the most prominent real estate in your...
That's true. That is so true. Especially when it's deteriorating, because I mean, we could put a heritage designation on a building and a property owner could says, well, that's fine, we'll make it heritage and we'll just leave it, and it just falls by demolition by neglect.
Yeah, exactly. No, it's so true. And then the only one who gets to live there are the rats.
Pretty much.
No, I totally agree. So there's some good points there. Basically, the way you see forward on the housing is that we absolutely do. We do need some more annexation. We need more lands. We're stuck in basically an infill pocket right now. We need to overturn some of the decisions being made specifically within the heritage designation section of things. What do you think about any further discussion on homes in terms of height of new buildings?
That definitely has to change as well. We're limited right now, the max height, I believe, at 8 stories. And there are areas, if you look at your Lansdowne East, there are areas on Lansdowne East where you could allow for development of taller buildings. Are we ready as a community for 30, 40 floors? Well, we're not Vaughan, Richmond Hill, or those communities, but we can develop much higher than 8 floors. And, there's been a lot of apartment builds. I had a conversation yesterday about the number of apartments being built in Peterborough. Well, that's a disadvantage. It addresses housing, but it disadvantages the municipality if you were building condos instead. So we should be looking at a continuum of housing that allows for the apartment, the single-family home, the entry-level home, supportive housing, and condos, as well as estate properties.
So condos, you're saying that they disadvantage the municipality? I've never heard that, so just curious your take on it.
No, they're advantage to the municipality, and why you see so many of them in Mississauga and so many of them built in Toronto, because you're collecting taxes now on each unit, subject to the same tax increases as a single-family home. But we don't have a lot of condo projects being built in the Peterborough area. And we do need more. We do need more.
Interesting. So you're in favor of that.
Definitely.
If you were to become the next mayor, there might be some more condo approvals.
We would definitely want to have developers have an easier path to getting that kind of structure built, because your entry level cost on a condo is going to be a little less than a single family home as well.
Totally.
So if we're trying to get to housing affordability, and in fact, Bill 109 does provide a path so municipal governments can even consider tiny homes. We've heard a lot of them, but it leaves that space for us to discuss the development charges and say, well, the development charge on a 1,200 square foot home is going to be the same as the development charge on a 500 square foot home. So now we can open the door to that conversation with the provinces. Okay, we want a different approach on development charges if we're going to go the tiny home route.
And do you think they would look at decreasing them then?
I think that's the only way you're going to get those tiny homes built and to get to affordability as well as co-housing solutions. You're going to have to reduce those development charges on smaller properties.
Yeah, it's funny. The tiny home discussion, sometimes people think of it as like it's not a real solution. But the thing is that tiny homes, because we live in the climate we do, and we have 4 seasons, we have a very long winter. When you look down south, you look in Florida, it's not tiny, it's just trailer parks, right? That's what we're trying to replace, is that segment of the market. And trailer parks provide a lot of good shelter for a lot of people that are in different phases of life. And some people are entirely content from start to finish. It all depends on what you want and what you need, but we don't even have that option, an outlet for people to go and just have a trailer and live. There's so few even the trailer parks are all full.
I've looked at some designs on tiny homes, and I think they've come a long way since the trailer park days. But it's, how do you develop a tiny home community and have it synchronized with a single family home community, condos, and a development with executive homes or estate type properties. So nothing's ever come to the city and says, well, here's a planning application that looks at all of that continuum of housing and say, what if we did do a development that had incorporated some of these tiny home designs? But when we hear tiny homes in Peterborough as a member of council, we're usually hearing it attached to your solution to homelessness.
Right.
And if you look at Skid Row in California, do you really want to replicate that in your community? We need to find a solution for housing for our segment of our populations that are marginalized. But anytime you've clustered housing developments or social housing development, you stigmatize an address for employment opportunities are reduced. Your crime rate goes up. And these are real problems that we can point to examples in Ontario, Malvern, Jane and Finch, Regent Park, and where you're years later saying, my goodness, we've got to tear this entire community down because we've clustered income.
It's funny you say that. I listened to a Joe Rogan podcast recently that there's a gentleman that I believe is in the same situation as you. I think he had actually been elected as a mayor in California, and he was going through talking about what they're going to do. And he's talking specifically about Skid Row, and he said that it just got so bad that what it became was the drug trading hub. Essentially, it was the place to go where people didn't want to leave any further from there because it was where all of the substances were, and it compiled and accumulated, and then it became unsolvable.
It becomes unmanageable. But, I've looked at organizations like Redemptive Solutions out of Edmonton who look at it and says, well, 15 units in subsidized housing is ideal. You're not stigmatizing a neighborhood. You haven't clustered.
So compartmentalize it a little bit, not too, you can't try and solve it all in one spot.
No. If you zone an entire area and says, let's build 150 units of social housing here, then you're creating a problem for the future. No, well put. I think you've got... It's understood. They're tough topics to approach, and I think that it's a sensible way. You gotta attack it somehow, but you gotta be realistic about what actually works for the community at large. Exactly.
So I think is this Kremahi? Was that an example of a municipality we mentioned? Yeah, because you had some notes there.
So we've got when you go back to Bill 109, you've got Cranford Township that's already starting to raise the alarm around some of what it sees as concerns with Bill 109.
Okay, and this is a township that's south east of here, about 40 minutes probably from where we are. Yeah, below
Yes.
Rice Lake there.
Yes.
Yeah.
And, you know, some of the concerns that they raise, such as the funding of development charges, I mean, they're legitimate concerns. And I think this is going to have to come back to the provincial government to revisit some of these things. You know, a development application, depending on when it's filed, if it's filed as a complete application, and, you know, councils delay the process of providing an approval. You know, you're 50% within 30 days or from the application filing. Don't quote me on the exact time frame. But you've got a staged refunding process if an application doesn't get final approval and the permits necessary for development. So the township has raised that as a concern and says when you look at the community versus, you know, any other community of its size, the concerns are always going to be different. And some of the delays might also relate to rollover in staff. You know, you get an application in, and then you lose 2 or 3 people
In
from
a
your
small
planning
department, it really hurts. Yeah.
So then, you know, the municipality would be on the hook for refunding some of that development fees.
Interesting. Yeah, and so they're already started. They're one of the first to lobby up a bit of an opposition to this bill.
Yeah.
And you hit on a point that is interesting to me is turnover and staff turnover and the ability to hire talent or really get any, you know, reliable staff to continue to scale up a planning department and an approvals department. I know that there's issues with that as right now with the cost of living. It's just difficult in terms of what the municipalities can afford to pay these individuals. So to me, it seems an obvious part that to up the horsepower, the processing horsepower in the approvals department is a no-brainer because, I mean, an individual's salary on the planning side, you know, ranging between, you know, 40 to 70,000, somewhere in this range. And then, you know, to process an extra 3 permits in a year, basically, you know, it doesn't work that way, but that covers their wages. So, like in terms of the city's budget, so it just seems like such a no-brainer. How do we not hire more staff in this section? But then I know attracting and retaining talent based on wages is an issue. Can you make the bargain? Like, what our city's budget is? What how many billion?
Just a little over $300 million.
$300 million. Pardon me, $300 million. And so I think if $300 million, how can you not afford to pay a little bit more to some of these staff to get talent?
You know, it's a chicken and egg scenario, quite frankly, because if you were to add more to your building department and you look at in one year versus another year, how many building applications or building permits issued? And you say, well, okay, in this year it justifies having that talent in. So we have to come up with more creative approaches. One of the ideas that somebody mentioned is that when you have a developer that has an urban planner on staff already, helping them compile their building application, in some cases, that developer comes to you with a complete application in a way that there are provisions in the development that considers transit, park space, that your planning department has to go through site plans on. But a developer with a good urban planner will already bring all that to the table. Those applications should never be delayed.
Right.
They're complete.
Yeah. I know, because I think in terms, like you said, with scaling, it's like any business. You look at the city. I always look at the city as a business. Any of these entities that you have to generate revenue on your own, and you're accountable for that in terms of what you have to spend. And if you look at how do you scale up in a busy time when you're a business? Well, you bring in third parties, or you use sub trades. And as a contractor, you can hire another carpenter and try and train him up and go through all the risk involved in that, or you subcontract the work to somebody. And so in terms of these municipalities being able to sub stuff out, I know that they do that, but I think it's expensive, right, to go to the third party route. And then there's lack of continuity, I guess, in the communication and the objectives.
So it's like when we went back to that same argument of amalgamation and whether it would impact jobs. You know, streamlining building departments would be of a benefit because you've got some amazing planners in some of the townships. You know, we've got some amazing folks here in the city of Peterborough. You know, I had one planner come to me and says, well, we've got a subdivision being built, so where's the park space? and brought some ideas for it, such as, well, why isn't the park being scaled up with the level of development? So when you're 50% done the project, you've got your developers already on site. They have their trades on site. Why wasn't the community benefit for an arena or a library a part of the development, so that the same trades are there, can actually scale that up as the development is approaching completion? And these are great ideas. It saves the city money. It gets the community the facilities that they need as the development happens. And you're not going back, years later and saying, okay, now it's time to address putting the park in, having to send out tenders to bring somebody else in to do a job that could have been done because you had the trades already there. So it's thinking a little bit more efficiently about how to do things.
Which you probably a lot of lessons to be learned from municipalities you lived in before. Like when you take the peripheral of the GTA, there's no need to reinvent the wheel on some. It's all been done.
It's already been done somewhere already.
Yeah.
Some amazing things from other municipalities. In fact, getting the examples from other municipalities, we have at our ability as councillors, the AMO, the Association Municipality for Ontario. We've got the Ontario Good Roads, and we have the Federation of Canadian Municipality. In fact, I'm going to their conference in Regina in June to talk more specifically about 3-story condos. They're built in Montreal. What are the zoning? What provincial legislation that needs to happen to allow us to start doing those same things here?
No, that's amazing. So I guess looking at the time here, I think we definitely covered a fair amount there on the housing side of things. Is there anything else, Steve, before we wrap up, that you think is pertinent, the message you want to get out there as you're on the campaign trail here, so to speak, to anybody listening?
Oh, no, definitely. We want to let people know that I come from the lived experiences, and our families worked in the industry. And some of the things that we've experienced is what we're bringing to the table as real, workable, and tangible solutions to addressing some of today's more complex problems. When it comes to housing affordability, economic development, we have a real clear plan how we're going to move this community and this region, quite frankly, forward in becoming a viable place.
So how do you, and I guess in a few words, how do you see Peterborough at the end of a 4-year term looking different than what would you want people to think of the most?
Oh, people are going to come here and say, wow, this was the right choice. And Stephen Wright was the right call.
Yeah, the name's a natural.
Yeah.
No, that's great. And so where should anybody get a hold of you, Steve? Or for millennials watching, people my age, how can anybody follow you or learn more about you?
Yeah, to make sure we get the message out to those millennials who need a housing affordability and that these issues are really targeted to them.
Yep.
Facebook, Instagram, Twitter.
You're there.
Yeah, I've even put something out on TikTok.
Yeah. Nice.
And typical following is Stephen at whatever, and Twitter is at Stephen A. Wright.
At Stephen A. Wright.
Instagram is Stephen A. Wright.
Yeah. Excellent. No, sounds good. Well, it's been a pleasure to have you on here, Steve. Great to chat with you. And we'll look forward to watching you on the campaign trail and interested to see if you can implement some of the ideas that you've mentioned here today. So
great. Thanks a lot for having us have the opportunity for this discussion.
Absolutely. Yep. Absolutely. Okay. Hopefully everybody enjoyed, and we'll look forward to chatting with everybody next week. Take care, guys.